The sun, an unfamiliar visitor, beat down on the Atacama Desert. Its light was a cruel joke, a stark contrast to the darkness that was about to consume a generation of men. It was August 5th, 2010. Below the surface, a kilometer and a half deep, 33 miners were starting their shift. The San Jose mine was a temperamental beast, a 1,000-year-old rock with a history of grumbles and groans. But today, it was silent. Too silent. Then came the scream. Not a human cry, but the deafening roar of a mountain giving up. At 2 p.m., a chunk of rock, twice the size of the Empire State Building, broke free from the main shaft. The ground shook. Dust, so thick it choked the air, filled the tunnels. It was a geological punch, a cataclysm that sealed off the only exit, trapping the miners in the belly of the earth. In an instant, 33 lives were erased from the world above. Or so everyone thought. Above ground, the world was slow to react. News of a miner collapse was common in Chile's mining industry. But as the hours turned to days, the silence from below became a terrifying reality. Families, wives, and children, their faces etched with a desperate hope, began to gather at the mine's entrance. The air was thick with a grief that hadn't yet been given a name. Authorities promised action, but the scale of the disaster was unprecedented. Rescuers tried to enter through a ventilation shaft, but it was just a dead end, a funnel of rock and dirt. Every attempt was met with the same cold, unyielding wall. The world watched, holding its breath. For 17 days, the story was the same: silence. The families held vigils, their prayers a thin thread of hope in the face of absolute despair. The media descended, their cameras a testament to a tragedy they believed was already over. Experts declared it a lost cause. No one could survive a collapse like that, they said. The air alone would kill them. The miners were presumed dead, their fate sealed in a tomb of rock. But what they didn't know was that one man, a former military sergeant named Luis Urzua, had just found a tiny, desperate flicker of hope in the darkness. The world had given up on them, but 1.5 miles below the surface, the 33 men of the San Jose mine were just beginning their fight. The initial chaos of the collapse gave way to a chilling, calculated reality. The air, thick with dust and a palpable sense of doom, was the first enemy. Visibility was zero. The only light was the fading glow of headlamps, a dwindling resource they knew would not last. Under the leadership of Luis Urzua, the shift foreman, they found their way to the refuge, a small dark chamber meant to hold maybe 20 people for a day or two. Now it was their world, their tomb. For the first 48 hours, they were paralyzed by shock and the roar of the mountains settling. They heard rocks grinding, groaning, and falling, the earth itself seeming to mourn their fate. When the sound subsided, another horror set in: hunger. The refuge was stocked with an emergency food supply meant to last them for only 3 days. Each man received a single teaspoon of tuna, half a biscuit, and a glass of milk every 48 hours. It was a diet of desperation, a testament to how far they had to stretch their resources. They were starving, not just for food, but for hope. As the days crawled by, the psychological toll mounted. The total darkness, the suffocating heat, the constant gnawing hunger. It was a pressure cooker designed to break the human spirit. Men began to argue, despair, and lash out. Fear was a contagion, spreading through the small group. They had to organize, or they would tear each other apart. Urzua, with his calm authority, became their leader, their shepherd in the dark. He enforced a strict routine, a discipline born of military training. They held prayers, kept a schedule, and most importantly, rationed the food. Every crumb was a victory, every drop of water a life-giving miracle. By the second week, they were shadows of their former selves. Their bodies had consumed most of their fat, and their muscles began to waste away. They drank contaminated water from a radiator, their stomachs twisted in knots, but a flicker of resolve remained. They took turns praying, telling stories, and talking about their families, holding on to the idea of a future they knew was slipping away. On the surface, the rescuers tried everything, but after 17 days of silence, the operation had stalled. They were preparing for the final gruesome task of recovery. But underground, in a silence only they could hear, a new plan was taking shape. The miners were not waiting for rescue. They were going to help find a way out. Above ground, the world had lost hope. The rescuers, exhausted and defeated, were on the verge of declaring the miners' fate a tragedy, a sad footnote in the long, dangerous history of mining. But on the 17th day, August 22nd, a miracle occurred. A drill, part of a new, desperate attempt to find any trace of the men, broke through to a small tunnel. The sound was faint, a metallic whisper in the vast silence. When the drill bit was brought to the surface, a piece of paper, folded and wrapped in a plastic bag, was attached to its tip. A handwritten note, scrawled with a marker, was a single, defiant statement that would electrify the globe. Estemos bien en el refugio los 33. We are all fine in the refuge, the 33 of us. The news spread like wildfire. A roar erupted from the families, a primal, joyous cry that was heard around the world. The silence of the Atacama was replaced by a cacophony of celebration, disbelief, and renewed hope. News crews who had been packing up scrambled to set up their cameras. The story of a presumed tragedy had just become a miraculous survival tale. The next day, a small camera was sent down the borehole, a technological eye into the miners' world. The footage was grainy, but undeniable. 33 haggard, bearded faces, their eyes hollow but full of life, stared back. They were thin, dehydrated, and in terrible condition, but they were alive. And just as the world had lost hope, they had found it again. But the discovery was only the beginning of a new and even more daunting challenge. Now that they knew the miners were alive, they had to figure out how to get them out. The mine was still a ticking bomb time, a massive, unstable rock formation that could collapse at any moment. They had to get food, water, and medical supplies down to the men, who had survived for 17 days on a diet that would barely sustain a child for one. The world watched as a new phase of the rescue began. This wasn't just about saving 33 men. It was a testament to the power of human endurance, a story that had just captured the hearts and minds of a planet in desperate need of a good news story. The miners had survived the darkness. Now they just had to survive the wait. With the world watching, the mission to rescue the 33 miners transformed from a desperate search into an unprecedented feat of engineering. The challenge was immense. How do you dig a hole 1.5 miles deep through thousands of feet of solid rock and bring each man out one by one without the tunnel collapsing? This was no simple excavation. It was a race against time and geology. The Chilean government called on the world's best engineers and drilling experts. 3 separate plans, nicknamed Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C, were initiated simultaneously, each using different drilling technologies to increase the odds of success. Plan A, the most conventional, used a massive drill called the Strata 950. This machine was a slow, methodical beast designed for long-distance drilling. Its progress was agonizingly slow, just a few feet a day. The miners, now receiving regular food and supplies through the initial borehole, were in a constant state of agonizing hope and fear. Every day the drill noise got closer. They believed their rescue was imminent, but the rock was stubborn and the drill was a tortoise in a race against a cheetah. Plan B, however, was the dark horse. A massive oil drilling rig, the Stram T-130, was brought in. This rig was designed for a different kind of rock, and its sheer power was a gamble. But it was a gamble they had to take. The drill was a monster, boring through the rock at a much faster rate, but with less precision. The world held its breath every time the rig's powerful motors roared to life. Would it hit the mark, or would it veer off course and miss the refuge completely? And finally, there was Plan C. This was the most radical and ambitious plan, using a powerful drill typically reserved for large-scale mining operations. This drill could create a wide, stable shaft, but it was incredibly slow. The three plans, all working simultaneously, were a testament to the international collaboration that had coalesced around this crisis. Teams from the United States, Canada, and around the world descended on the site, their expertise a beacon of hope in the arid desert. While the drills worked above, a different kind of struggle was unfolding below. The miners, though now sustained by food and water, were facing a new kind of enemy, the psychological toll of their confinement. While the drills gnawed at the earth, a different, more insidious threat was taking hold underground. The miners were no longer just fighting for their lives against the rock. They were battling their own minds. The initial euphoria of being found had worn off, replaced by the crushing monotony of their confinement. The space was hot, humid, and smelled of sweat and despair. They were trapped in a routine of waiting. The days bled into one another, marked only by the arrival of a new supply capsule, a paloma or dove, bringing food, water, and letters from loved ones. The world above could see them, but it was a one-way connection. They could not see the sun, the sky, or the faces of their families. The psychological toll was immense. Claustrophobia set in, a panic-inducing fear of being trapped. Depression, a heavy blanket of hopelessness, settled over the group. The men began to exhibit signs of mental distress. Some became withdrawn, refusing to talk or eat. Others grew paranoid and irritable, arguing over trivial matters. Luis Rzua, the group's leader, had to become more than a foreman. He became a psychologist, a mediator, and a source of unwavering strength. He enforced strict routines, making sure the men were occupied with tasks, whether it was sorting the supplies, helping with health checks, or simply praying together. They found solace in the simple act of being human, of connecting with each other in the most inhumane of circumstances. Medical professionals and psychologists, communicating through the borehole, became a lifeline. They advised Rzua on how to manage the mental health of his men, and they designed a system of psychological support. They sent down motivational letters and videos, and they arranged video calls with family members. This small act, seeing the faces of their wives and children, gave them the strength to keep going. But the psychological strain was only one part of the battle. Their physical health was also in rapid decline. Many suffered from infections, skin rashes, and dental problems. The doctors had to figure out how to treat these illnesses with the limited resources they could send down the narrow shaft. Every day was a test of their resilience. Every day they had to convince themselves that rescue was coming, that the promise of a life above ground was not a cruel lie. The world was watching, but for the 33, it was a silent, personal struggle in the dark. As the drills inched closer, the miners' resolve was put to the ultimate test. They knew the world was racing to save them, but they also knew that a single misstep, a single tremor, could seal their fate forever. After 62 days underground, a miracle was on the horizon. Plan B, the most aggressive of the rescue plans, had finally reached its target. On October 9, 2010, the drill from the Schramm T-130 broke through to the miners' chamber. A cheer, part relief and part disbelief, erupted from the thousands gathered at the mine's entrance. The rescue was no longer a hope. It was a reality. But the journey was far from over. The hole was only about a foot wide, a perfect funnel for the rescue capsule, but the shaft itself was still fragile and susceptible to collapse. An entirely new phase of the operation began, securing the shaft with steel casing. This was a painstaking, methodical process. Steel pipes, each one a monument to human ingenuity, were lowered into the hole to create a protective tunnel. The risk of the shaft collapsing during this process was immense, and the engineers worked with a quiet, focused intensity. The world watched, but the celebration was muted. Everyone knew that the final, most dangerous part of the rescue was yet to come. Below, the miners were filled with a raw, overwhelming mixture of joy and apprehension. They knew their ordeal was nearing its end, but they also knew they had to face the claustrophobic journey to the surface. To prepare for the final ascent, the miners were put on a strict diet of liquid foods designed to reduce their body mass and ensure they would fit into the narrow capsule. They were also given specialized jumpsuits to help regulate their body temperature during the journey. The doctors, communicating through the borehole, gave them detailed instructions on how to use the Phoenix capsule, a custom-built rescue vehicle that looked like something out of a science fiction movie. The capsule was a triumph of engineering, a narrow, cylindrical pod with a harness and a small oxygen tank. There was no room for error. A single snag, a single miscalculation could lead to disaster. On October 12th, after weeks of relentless work, the shaft was declared ready. The drills were silent. The world held its breath. The moment they had all been waiting for had arrived. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic and emotionally charged events in modern history. The first rescuer, a brave man who volunteered to be lowered into the abyss, began his descent. The miners who had lived underground for 69 days were about to see the sun for the first time. The moment of truth had arrived. The first of the 33 miners, Florencio Avalos, was strapped into the Phoenix capsule. Below, his brothers in the dark watched, their hearts in their throats. Above, the world watched on a live broadcast, a global audience of 1 billion people holding a collective breath. The capsule was a tight fit, a metal coffin on a wire, and the journey to the surface would take almost 15 minutes. The ascent was slow, methodical, a tense ballet of cable and steel. When the capsule finally breached the surface, a roar of triumph erupted from the crowd. The miners' families, the rescuers, and the entire nation of Chile erupted in cheers. A single man, his face gaunt but his eyes full of life, stepped out into the blinding light of a new dawn. One by one, they came up. Each ascent was a victory. The Phoenix, a symbol of hope and resurrection, descended and returned, its cargo a testament to the unyielding power of the human spirit. The order of their rescue was carefully planned. The healthiest first, then the sickest, and finally their leader, Luis Arzua, who had stayed behind to ensure every single one of his men was safe. The sight of each man emerging from the earth, their bodies battered but their spirits intact, was a powerful, emotional moment. They were met by their families, their doctors, and the president of Chile, a sign of the international significance of their ordeal. The rescue lasted for nearly 24 hours. The world stayed up, riveted by the sight of each new face, each new life reclaimed from the jaws of a geological tomb. The miners were once shadows in the dark, but now they were heroes, their story a global sensation. They had been trapped for 69 days, the longest subterranean confinement in history, and they had survived. They emerged from the darkness not as victims, but as survivors, a powerful reminder of the human capacity for resilience in the face of impossible odds. Their story was a testament to collaboration, ingenuity, and the unyielding strength of hope. They had been buried alive, but they had lived, and now they were finally home.